Why did the Maya civilization disappear, leaving behind cities with no people, temples with no priests, and kings with no thrones? For centuries, one question haunted explorers and historians: where did the Maya go? But the truth is stranger than the legend. The Maya did not simply vanish. The real mystery is why their greatest cities were abandoned, one by one. There was no final invasion, no single burning capital, no emperor falling on a battlefield. This was not the fall of one empire. It was the slow silence of an entire world. A world of stone, stars, kings, drought, war, and faith pushed beyond its limits. And to understand its collapse, we must first enter the world the Maya built. Long before European ships crossed the Atlantic, the Maya built one of the greatest civilizations in the ancient Americas. Their world stretched across southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and the deep forests of Central America. They had no steel, no horses, and no great machines to lift their temples into the sky. And yet, in the middle of the jungle, they built cities of stone that still survive today. They studied the stars, tracked the movement of Venus, and measured time with astonishing precision. They carved their history into stone, recording kings, wars, rituals, births, deaths, and sacred dates. To the Maya, time was not just a number. Time was alive, powerful, and divine. Their pyramids were not only buildings, they were mountains made by human hands, reaching toward the gods. Every staircase, every carving, every mask of stone carried a message from the world above. But the Maya were not an empire like Rome. There was no single capital ruling over all.
There was no one emperor, no central army, and no single throne controlling the Maya world.
Instead, Maya civilization was a network of powerful city-states, each ruled by its own king. Tikal, Calakmul, Palenque, Copan, the Phoebus. Each city had its own power, gods, and ambitions. Some cities became allies. Others became enemies. The jungle was filled with rival kingdoms. This made the Maya world brilliant, diverse, and creative. But it also made it fragile. Because when disaster came, there was no united empire strong enough to hold everything together. The Maya world would not fall as one. It would collapse city by city. Between roughly 250 and 900 AD, the Maya entered their great classic age. Cities expanded, temples rose higher, and royal courts became centers of wealth, ritual, and power. At sunrise, smoke from sacred fires climbed above the pyramids and disappeared into the sky. In crowded plazas, merchants traded jade, cacao, feathers, pottery, obsidian, and precious goods from distant lands. Above them all stood the king, dressed in feathers, jade, and symbols of divine authority. A Maya king was not only a ruler, he was the bridge between humans and the gods. He performed sacred rituals to call the rain, protect the harvest, and preserve cosmic order. When the rains came, the king's power looked eternal. The gods had listened. When crops grew, monuments were carved, temples were painted, and cities celebrated their divine destiny. For a time, it must have seemed as if the Maya world would last forever. But greatness has a cost, and the Maya cities were growing beyond the limits of their environment. More people meant more food. More food meant more fields. More fields meant more forest cut down. Trees were cleared to plant maize, build homes, burn fires, and produce lime for shining temple walls. The jungle that had protected them was slowly being pushed back by the needs of civilization. The soil was worked harder. The hillsides were farmed. The land began to lose its strength. And in many Maya regions, water was always the most fragile foundation of life. Rivers were limited. Rain had to be collected. Reservoirs had to be managed with great care. The entire system depended on one thing no king could truly command: the sky.
Then, slowly, the rhythm of the seasons began to change.
The first crack in the Maya world was not stone, it was water. The droughts came like a curse. Not one dry season, but years of weak and failing rain. Reservoirs shrank. Fields turned yellow. Maize withered before it could feed the cities. Families waited for clouds that never broke. Priests climbed temples and prayed into an empty sky. For the Maya, drought was not just bad weather. It was a spiritual crisis.
If the king spoke to the gods, then every dry field became a dangerous question.
Why was the rain not coming? Why were the gods silent? Why could the king not save them? Hunger does not only weaken bodies, it weakens loyalty, faith, and the power of those who rule. The drought dried the fields, but it also dried the belief that held the cities together. A king who could not bring rain could no longer look chosen by heaven. And once divine power begins to break, political power begins to fall with it. The Maya crisis was no longer only about water. It had become a crisis of trust. As food became scarce and power weakened, rival city-states turned against one another. Kings fought for land, tribute, captives, trade routes, and the prestige needed to survive. Alliances shattered. Old enemies returned. The jungle world became a battlefield of burning rivalries. War was not new to the Maya. But war during hunger is something far more dangerous. Every defeat became harder to recover from. Every lost harvest made every enemy more threatening. Cities that once carved victories into stone began to carve fewer and fewer monuments. Royal courts weakened. Trade slowed. Roads became unsafe. The old order began to fracture. Drought, hunger, and war were no longer separate disasters. Together, they formed a perfect storm. The Maya kings had promised balance between earth and heaven, between people and gods. But when rain failed, wars spread, and hunger entered the temples, that promise collapsed. Across the southern lowlands, something strange happened. The great stone voices began to fall silent. Monuments stopped being carved. Royal inscriptions disappeared. Ceremonial centers lost their power. The collapse was not one explosion. It was a silence spreading slowly from city to city. A civilization does not always end with fire. Sometimes it ends when people stop believing.
One by one, the great cities were abandoned. Not all at once, and not in a single night.
Families left their homes, markets emptied, palaces decayed, and temples stood without priests. The stones remained, but the people moved on. And slowly, the jungle returned. Roots cracked the stairways. Vines covered the masks of gods. Trees rose above forgotten plazas. The Maya did not disappear. Their cities did. Their descendants still live, carrying the memory forward.